Welcome to the Coach Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Keren Eldad. Settle in. We're about to make you feel really good. Welcome back to the Coach Podcast for a new episode of our Coaching Masters series, a series we have dedicated to exposing you to the greatest teachers of our time. I'm your host, Coach Keren Eldad, and today's host is truly one of the greatest teachers of our time, Dr. Gay Hendricks. Gay has been for 50 years a major contributor in psychology, and along with his wife and co-creator, Dr. Gay Hendricks, has been and is a best-selling author. And if you've read just one of his books, like The Big Leap, Conscious Loving, 5 Wishes, or his latest memoir, which I have been devouring, Loving Life, you already know that you're in for a transmission. For more than 5 decades, Gay has guided millions of people towards genuine happiness and lasting love, myself included. And beyond his legendary work, I've learned that he's a cat lover like me, a baseball enthusiast, a mystery novelist, a devoted husband, and it turns out also a serial entrepreneur who sold companies for many millions, only to return to teaching what he loves, the job he calls a job he can never retire from. In his new memoir that I just mentioned, Loving Life, which I think is fittingly titled, and by the way, was titled by his friend, Kenny Loggins, he traces his extraordinary journey from small-town Southern boy to self-actualized teacher who has meditated every day since 1972 and who somehow has had run-ins with Ram Dass and Jimi Hendrix. I am so excited to take you through this adventure together. I know that if you know Gay's work, you're as excited to listen as I am, and I hope we can all settle in because we are all about to hear from a living legend. Gay, it's such a joy to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate it. And I should mention also that with the new memoir, you get to see a picture of what I look like in the fifth grade.
Yes, I couldn't believe it. You know, I was chubby too. And I couldn't believe it.
We have a lot in common. We have dentistry in common. We both have new crowns, and we formerly chubs.
It's so true. We really do. And, you know, I can't tell you how honored I am to have anything in common with one of my greatest mentors. I also have had a truly tremendous experience reading your new book, Loving Life, because, you know, Gay, I got to be honest with you. I've been reading your books for years, and I've been reading them for me. But this time I actually got to read them to get to know you. I've gotten to know me better, especially thanks to The Big Leap, a book that I can't tell you how many people have told me that book has changed my life, mine included. But your book, Loving Life, is our opportunity to get to know you. So I'd love to begin there. If it's okay, it's such a beautiful reflection of your early years to present day. Can you share with the audience some of your story and share what it was like to revisit your childhood, your grandparents, your very colorful grandparents, by the way, your Aunt Kat?
Yes, well, I had the benefits. If you're going to be a therapist later in life, a psychologist, or a relationship expert, my family was the right one to be born into because it was a spectacular, large Southern family that had, they'd been in Florida for 3 generations. And my mother was a very high-powered, chain-smoking, typewriter pounding woman who not only had a career as a newspaper person and a newspaper columnist, but she also, somebody dared her to run for mayor. And so because no woman had ever been mayor of this small town that we lived in, 10,000 people, Leesburg, Florida. And so on a dare, she ran for mayor and won. And suddenly, not only did she get paid for expressing her opinions every day in the newspaper, but she was also, kind of in the mayor's position of having ideas about everything. And so she was right about everything. That was one thing about my mom. And but I had a great granddad and grandmother too. My granddad and grandmother were married, I think 63 years, but my mom always said that they spent 59 and a half of those years not speaking to each other. And so they had a classically toxic relationship, but along the way, they had four girls and my mom, and so they. But it was kind of a wild and crazy family, and I would talk about it, except nobody would believe me. You got to just read it in there
Yeah.
because I would sound like I was making stuff up.
It's such a tremendous story. And I really love that your framing has been so perfect for this, because you said if you want to become a psychologist, anybody who's really an observer of humans, this was exactly the right family in which to grow up. And you write about it so lovingly and so understandingly as well. In other words, from a person who is not only complete in where he stands, but also in his understanding and his knowledge, you can see them in a different way. You can see your mother in a completely different way. And I love that also you mentioned that plot twist that got her to become the mayor. I have to say, that kind of sounds like you. There were some plot twists that basically led you to your zone of genius, a concept we will be, I hope, visiting in depth in this conversation, to that brought you to this job from which you never want to retire. And you told a wonderful story about how basically you just kind of get rolling and end up in the first position that catapults you here. Can you talk about that transition?
Are you talking about the time I had the fall?
And then you took the English teacher job. Yes.
Yes. And so I should really make a big point of the fact that obesity was a very big deal for me when I was a kid, because I was the only fat person in a family where everybody else was skinny. And so I was taken around to different medical professionals, and oh gosh, I was put on every which kind of diet you can think of. And one year they had me on diet pills, which were amphetamines. Now, looking back on it, they were just basic amphetamines. And I remember that year was when I was in the ninth grade. And I made straight A's because I couldn't ever sleep, and so I didn't have anything to do except my homework. But as soon as they took me off the uppers, I crashed again and gained weight. But anyway, I had this amazing event happen when I was 24 years old. And I was 100 pounds more than I weigh now. I weigh about 190, 95 pounds now, and I'm 6 feet tall. So, I look like an athletic kind of old guy. And but at that time I was very pear-shaped, 300 pounds. And I went out for a walk one day. I should also say I was in a very toxic relationship that I'd been in, and I couldn't get out of it because I literally didn't have enough money to move to a different apartment. And so I was stuck in this toxic relationship, and I was a heavy smoker at the time. I puffed away on 2 or 3 packs of Marlboros a day. And I went out for a walk one day to clear my head after a big argument. And I slipped on the ice, and I went down on my back, and I didn't knock myself out. I went whoomp. And for comparison, a 300-pound person weighs about what a refrigerator weighs. And so imagine a refrigerator falling over on its back. Well, that's whoomp. I hit the ground and I banged my head. But like I said, I didn't knock myself unconscious. In fact, it had the opposite effect. For about 2 minutes, I had an experience that changed my life completely, because it was like I had a microscope seeing down into myself for the first time. And I saw how much old anger I had about growing up without a father and being fat and things like that. And I could also feel how much sorrow and grief I had about my father's death. And I'd never done anything. I'd never cried or anything or even acknowledged that. And I also could feel how scared I was that I was going to repeat my father's life. And he died at age 32, and I was already 24 years old. And I was saying, am I going to die before I ever accomplish anything? And so, but the beautiful thing was, it was like seeing down through all of those emotions that I'd kept trapped in. But behind all of them was this shimmering entity, kind of like the sky, or a lake without any ripples on it. It was this vast expanse of openness. And I call it pure consciousness. I didn't have a name for it at the time, but now I see it was just pure being without any of the doing on it.
Yeah.
It was just this backdrop of pure consciousness. And at the time, I didn't know anything about meditation or anything like that. I was an English major in college. And so but this thing happened to me. And lying there, I began to kind of come back after a few minutes to my regular state of consciousness. And I could feel, oh no, I still want a cigarette, or oh no, I got to walk back a mile in the cold to my apartment, and then I got to go back in there with, And so I felt all these layers of gloom descending on me. But I think what really saved the day is I made a specific commitment as I realized I was losing it, that state of consciousness. I couldn't feel it anymore. I was coming back into my regular self. And so I said, I commit to finding a way to feel that all the time. And I think that commitment must have activated some kind of guidance mechanism, like birds find their way across the sky with invisible tracks, kind of. And so I think as human beings, we get on the wrong track or the right track, and then life unfolds for us accordingly. Well, I think that put me on the right track, because right after that, I had occasion to go to a lecture by a former Harvard psychologist that my buddy had taken classes with at Harvard. And he called me one afternoon and said, hey, one of my old professors has got some kind of interesting trip going. He just got back from India, and I want to hear what he has to say. He was my favorite professor in college. And so I said, sure, let's go. It turned out to be Ram Dass. And he was just back from India in the full flower. He had all these disciples around him dressed in robes and yoga clothing. And I remember there was probably only about a dozen of us showed up for the lecture. But these young people came rushing out with bowls of fruit to give us and things. I'd never seen anything like this before, Keren. And in fact, I was kind of freaked out by it.
Yeah, it must have been very weird at the time.
It was very weird because I didn't know anything about yoga or anything like that. But I was soon to really get a good tip, because Ram Dass just blew me away. He talked for 3 hours without any notes. And I went up to him afterwards, and it was the most essential stuff of life he was talking about. And I'd never heard anybody talk about that before. But what blew me away, I was a freshman, a brand new English teacher at this little school for delinquent boys that I worked at. And I didn't ever go into a class without detailed notes, about what I was going to talk about. And so I went up to him afterwards and I said, how do you do that? Where do you get all this information from? And he looked at me kind of in surprise and he said, oh, it's all there. You just need to open up to it.
Yeah.
What? That sounded loony to me, but I couldn't doubt what was coming out of his mouth, so I said to him, I told him I just had this experience of falling on the ice and had this revelation. And I said, if you were going to continue that path, what would you do? And he said, well, you might do some therapy, but in India, you'd probably do a lot of yoga. You'd learn how to breathe and use your breathing for your consciousness. And above all, you'd learn how to meditate. And so again, that sounded, I didn't know anything about that. And here's the magic, though. I said, well, where would I learn about that? And I can, to this day, it was 50 some years ago, but I can remember he made this little dismissive hand gesture. He said, oh, something will come to you. And then he turned to talk to somebody else, like that was the end of the conversation. And so I went away a little bit disappointed, but later at the grocery store, I was checking out and I looked to my left and there was a little kiosk of paperback books. And one of them just seemed to almost jump out at me. It was called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation by Jess Stern. I imagine you can probably still get it today. I don't know. But anyway, I picked it up and I started leafing through it. And amazingly enough, it was exactly what I'd asked Ram Dass about. It was one chapter after another: chapter on breathing, chapter on yoga, chapter on meditation, chapter on chanting, all of these kinds of things that came out of nowhere. And suddenly I had a technology. And so I went home and I started going through that book, just one after the other. And by about midnight, I got to the meditation chapter. And I started doing this simple meditation. I think it was Om, Om, Om. But the thing was, within 2 minutes, I was back in that pure consciousness state without falling on the ground or anything like that. It was so easy. It was there all the time. And I just hadn't known about it or hadn't had a tool to get me there. Well, as of today, I've been a daily meditator now. I haven't missed a day since 1972. So that would be like 53 years ago. So I've got a 50-year meditation streak going. And I can't imagine anything changing in my life that would cause me to not do my daily meditation. Because, see, to me, that pure consciousness place is our true home.
Yes.
Our true home is not in ecstasy, because nobody can feel ecstasy 28 hours a day, and it's not in what we do or what we achieve, but it's in how we go about it, in the way we be from moment to moment. And once I discovered it, it was like I had a home to come home to for the first time in my life. And that's why I meditate every day and do breathing and things like that to this day.
And you built on it from there. I just want to underscore for everyone listening, the teachers and the students, and before they start to hate you because meditation came so easily to you, that you clearly tapped into, I think, a super consciousness in that ice slipping moment, which, by the way, you describe, I think, in similar terms with the medicines later, that the psychedelics journey a little bit, that just tapping into what consciousness is all about, which is a state of peace, a state of home. And you then allowed yourself to meet life as it was inviting you deeper into the work. Dick Alpert then becomes, Ram Dass shows up. You were, you had the fortitude and the wherewithal to show up at that. Then you had the wherewithal to reach for that book. And then you had the wherewithal to follow that rabbit down the hole again and again. And I think that's what really was amazing to me about Loving Life, your new book, because in all these plot twists, you just keep saying yes. For example, when you did mention that, first you mentioned that you had this creative moment in that moment of unconsciousness where you felt the pain. You finally connected the dots. You felt the pain that your mother must have gone through when your father made his transition so early before you came here. And then also the pain that you were carrying under all of the extra weight. But you also started to reach out of it. In other words, you started to see ahead. You set the intention. You made the decision. You set the intention that your life was going to go in a different direction. And as you conclude in your book, I'm not ruining it for anyone, don't worry. You really do get what you intend. That intention guides you. What struck me about that is also the evolution of your career, because that story that you very briefly mentioned about taking the job as an English teacher at a private school, which I found hilarious, turned out to be a disciplinary school for delinquent kids. You then fortuitously meet another character, Neil Martinello, and he makes a suggestion to you, to which, again, you could have said no, but you didn't. You said yes. And so you're starting to describe your career to me in a way that really makes me feel like you came by all of this very honestly. You, like every good teacher, through your experiences and through having the courage to face the trauma and to face the suffering and also the intention to get out of it, you made it to the other side.
Yeah, I frequently describe myself as the luckiest man I've ever met. But I also, as Louis Pasteur says, chance favors the prepared mind. And I think that I've always had that kind of curiosity streak in me, wonder and curiosity. And I know I drove my mother nuts when I was a kid by constantly asking her why about things, like, why do people talk about God as being up in that direction? Why isn't God everywhere? And I would
Yeah.
get asking these questions, and my mom finally just got tired of it, I think, and she'd say, "Go ask your granddad." My granddad was kind of a Masonic mystic. He was a high Mason teacher, but he was full of wisdom, none of which he practiced himself, but he had a lot of good wisdom to give to other people.
But you really do practice your wisdom. And in that first era, so you've described your career in 3 eras, which I also found absolutely fascinating. But the first era is like the happiness era and the self acceptance era. And you didn't just discover this slipping on the ice. You also discovered this. This was hilarious, with a very bad flu in New Zealand. How
Yeah.
does this come about? If you could share that story, and also what have you learned about happiness as a result of that? What do you think like really starts to cement this for you?
Oh, that was such a beautiful experience to have in such a horrible way. uh, Here's the story. My wife and I, Katie, and I once, because of being frequent flyers way back in the 80s when our books first started to take off and everything, we got back in the 80s a pair of free tickets, first class, anywhere in the world. And so we looked all over the map. Where would we like to go? And we looked at Tahiti and oh gosh. But some friends of ours came back from New Zealand and said, "Oh man, New Zealand is great. It's got everything. It's got mountains. It's got oceans. And so we got excited. And so we booked 2 first class tickets to New Zealand, and we had 3 weeks there. So what happened though was on the plane over, something like 250 out of the 350 people on board came down with the Shanghai flu, which was a big epidemic at the time. And the plane made the newspapers the next day because 247 of us had to be treated for flu symptoms. And so everybody on the plane got off there feeling miserable pretty much. And so Katie and I were both just felt like we could drag ourselves. And we had our first night's lodging in already paid for and booked in Rotorua. And we did not know this, but Rotorua was a spa town where the hot springs smelled like rotten eggs. They were sulfur hot springs.
Yeah.
And people would come from all over the world to soak in their hot springs, but the smell was intense. And we were there for 3 days where we hardly could get up off of our backs. and then when the wind would blow in a certain direction, suddenly these gusts of rotten egg smells would come through when we had the flu. And so basically, Yuck. All we could do is just lie there on our backs, and every hour or so I'd say, or Katie would say, "I love you," and the other one would say back, "I love you too." That was the only utterance. Everything felt exhausting, and I hope you've never had the flu that bad, but this was a real knockout punch. And anyway, after 3 days, we got better and we got out of town. And so, but what I learned from that was so much about where happiness comes from.
Yeah.
That it's not about the circumstances. Because even the word, like if you read the books of Viktor Frankl, for example, like Man's Search for Meaning, I encourage everybody to read a book like that, because here's a man in a concentration camp, and then they take away his paper and pencils that he's writing these things with. And so he's having to stuff paper down in the lining of his coat of these ideas he was having. And believe me, having the flu is not equivalent to that kind of suffering. But
of course,
when you're on the edge of whatever it is, bad flu or just, bad Nazis or whatever, you're up against it. And down there, I think it's why so many reformed alcoholics and drug addicts say they had to bottom out, to kind of feel the worst of themselves. We sat there just feeling miserable, but we found this other place down in there that didn't feel miserable at all. There was still a free and easy flow of love between us and a flow of consciousness back and forth. And it was a magical discovery. But I always like to make it clear that I've been invited back to New Zealand many times since then to give lectures and things like that and workshops. And every time I just go through this thing about, oh, I'd really like to do that, but so apparently here 50 years later, I have yet to get over it.
You clearly have a little bit of that, but that's okay. Forgive yourself. What I truly love is that you understood that happiness is a state of mind. It is completely independent of the circumstances. And while, by the way, my New Zealand is Switzerland and I will never go back, I feel you. I do understand that there's a moment where we all bottom out. And in that bottom, wherever our bottom is, we must recognize that there is still peace, and that peace is never going to be taken away from you. This is a huge secret. And I think also a conceptual cornerstone for two works that I'd love to just very briefly graze so that everyone who has not read them yet, they do read them. And that the first one I want to talk about is The Big Leap. The Big Leap came into my life many years ago, and it introduced me, like millions of others, to the fact that I potentially had an upper limit problem. I had no idea. Turns out I did. Can you share for those who are new to the concept how you got to it and what it means?
Yes. Well,
and how it blocks happiness?
Yeah. See, I think a lot of us, probably most of us, are allergic to happiness or allergic to feeling good because we've come to expect that something bad is going to happen after we let ourselves feel good. Like I always say, most people have seen a James Bond movie. If you ever see James Bond happily in bed with some beautiful woman sipping champagne, you just know that the next scene is going to be a giant buzzsaw going to come through the wall, because we've all been conditioned to expect the worst. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Don't let yourself feel too good.
Yeah.
So the upper limit problem is when we do that to ourselves later on in life. When things start to go better, we sabotage it by worrying about what might happen, or by having an accident, or getting sick, or creating an argument. So a lot of times we punish ourselves with self-sabotage when things are starting to go better and better. And I first noticed that on myself on one occasion that really put it in my mind to stay. Did I mention that I was yes, I did, that I was extremely obese.
Mm-hmm.
So after I had my big slipping on the ice, I lost 100 pounds over the next year by using my pure consciousness as a focal point and eating foods that seemed to feed that pure consciousness rather than fed my 300-pound body. And so I changed my whole diet over the course of the year and learned to love things like fruits and vegetables that I'd never really, those were just stuff. And what was a meal for me was a triple Big Mac and a extra large vanilla shake and an extra large fries. That was what I ate on. And no wonder I weighed 300 pounds. But anyway, I started changing my diet to eating pure consciousness foods. And within a year, I'd shed 100 pounds. And so I was down to, amazing weight that I'd never been at since I was maybe in the third grade. And so as a 24-year-old. But what happened was after I'd lost the first 35 pounds, I went down to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I was in Harvard Square, and I was on my way to the Harvard bookstore because I was in charge of the library at the little school that I worked at, and I was going there to buy some new books. And so I was nearing the Harvard bookstore, and I saw to my left a family eating a giant ice cream sundae.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally went unconscious. I'd been impeccable for the past month. I'd eaten fruits and vegetables and none of those fat-inducing foods. And I felt great. Even though if you looked at me, I wasn't 300 pounds, I was now 270 pounds. I still, you say, there goes a fat guy, So, but to me, losing a third of the weight I needed to lose in a month, that was like, whew, a big deal. And so what did I do? I went into this trance and went in and ordered and ate an ice cream sundae. And for about 20 minutes, I felt like the king of the universe when all of that sugar was pumping through me. But what happened right after that, I'll never forget. I can feel it this moment. I had the worst stomach ache. I was walking down the street in Harvard Square, and I had the worst stomach ache I ever had in my life. It was like getting punched in the belly.
Yeah.
And I remember folding over and just doubling over on the street there and was groaning. And I remember some woman came by me and said, "Are you okay, sir? Are you okay?" Oh boy, was I not okay, So I was in the grip of what I later called the upper limit problem.
Yeah.
I was allergic to feeling that good for any length of time. So I found a way to sabotage myself. And I noticed myself doing that several more times during the course of the year that I was losing the 100 pounds. So I started calling it the upper limit problem. And then I started working with executives a lot. And I noticed that even these really smart, sometimes famous people, even really, sometimes even billionaires, would do the upper limit problem.
Yeah.
And what would happen was, I remember one of my guys who was, at the time I had him in my counseling office, he was probably already worth at least $1 billion. And one time his stock value went up by several $100 million. And instead of saying whoopee and opening a bottle of champagne, he went home and created a monster argument with his mate.
Yeah, over toilet paper, if I recall correctly.
Well, actually, that was a different person.
That was a different person. I remember so many of the
stories. Used to fight with his wife about the cost of toilet paper. Yeah, toilet paper and peanut butter. He would always get mad at his wife for spending $7 on the organic peanut butter rather than $3.99 for the Zippy Jippy.
Ever since I read about that in The Big Leap, I just couldn't unsee it and just see the patterns. You're right. Of course, there have been many psychologists and social psychologists who then mimicked your work or found further validation through their own research that when we start getting very close to our own success, when we start getting close to our own freedom, we can't believe it in a way. And as a result, our own ego will kick us into a form of self-sabotage. What really fascinated me about the evolution of the book is where you took it next. And I think you talk also about how that's become the third obsession of your career, and that's the zone of genius. So it doesn't just interfere with your happiness. It's not only important for the listener to think, where am I possibly not allowing myself to fully experience joy, but also where am I not allowing myself to fully explore where my soul wants to go to self-actualize in this lifetime. How can someone begin to understand that concept too, Gay?
Yes. Well, the way to understand it is to remember what it felt like when you were a kid to be in the space of play, like playing with your favorite, whatever it was, whether it was board games or, in my daughter's case, she was just obsessed with art from the moment she could teeter around on two legs. She was always making art projects, and that's what she does to this day, 50 years later. And so we all have something we just love to do. And oftentimes a cue to it is what you did when you were a kid. Mm-hmm. So I call it the genius zone, or the zone of genius, because also, Keren, I started working with these really powerhouse CEOs, and I'd be walking down the hall with some fellow who's, a Harvard MBA, and he's already worth $100 million, and he's got the top job in his company, and he's unhappy most of the time. What? most of us who aren't in that position would say, oh, wow, if I had $100 million, I'd walk down the street skipping and whistling all the time. But a lot of times, the thing I noticed was it wasn't because they were married to the wrong person or sitting in the wrong kind of office or didn't have the right kind of position. It was because they had tapped out and topped out of their excellence zone and were yearning to get into their genius zone. Mm-hmm. And the genius zone is when you're doing what you love to do simultaneously as what you're doing that makes your biggest contribution to the world around you. And once I tapped into that myself, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm only spending 10% of my time doing my genius zone. And so I started accumulating more and more hours of time that I was dedicating to doing stuff that was in my genius zone. And I set the intention that by the end of the last century, 1999, I would be operating in my genius zone exclusively to everything else. And so I made my goal. So by the time I hit the 1999, I was doing 100% things that are in my genius zone. So I can proudly and humbly tell you that for the last 25 years, I haven't done a doggone thing that I don't love to do and that I believe makes a contribution.
Yeah, that is
right
the
now
dream.
What I'm doing.
That is the dream. That is the dream. It's a job that you never want to quit. And it's such a beautiful thing because you once again said, I set this intention and then I went about and did it. What would you say for some of my beloved friends out there, all of whom, by the way, say hello and love you very much, that they're like trying to reach back to their childhood and trying to remember, and they're trying to think about what they do that they're inimitable at, but they are stumped. What do you think is holding them up, and how can they break past that?
The root, the core, the fundamental of any kind of change begins with commitment. So to your friends or anyone, I would say, if you're having trouble making it happen, come back and make a deeper commitment to it. Make an even deeper. If you've made a heartfelt commitment, make a soul level commitment. If you've made a mental commitment, make a heartfelt commitment. But it's all in the quality of the commitment. Yeah. And life has an ingenious way of sending us back to the drawing board when we haven't quite refined our commitment yet. So that's the very first thing to check, is to get so that everything is in alignment, so that you know what your purpose is in your mind. You can feel it in your body. You can feel it in your heart. You can feel it down at the spirit level in you. So keep focusing on commitment. There's powerful magic there.
You are reminding me first of your first guru, Ram Dass, who seemed to be flicking and saying, you will find it or it will come to you, but was absolutely spot on. And also to the work of Viktor Frankl himself, who has many times said that self-actualization is actually a side effect of that commitment, rather than something that you can pursue head on. It's the state of commitment that gets you there. Thank you so much for saying that. I know they're going to really appreciate it, especially coming from you. Can I talk about another work really briefly?
Absolutely.
Conscious loving also was a foundational work for me. I, like you, enjoyed many garbage relationships for probably until I was like 38. I know what you're thinking, Keren. You don't look a day over 39, but I am. And it wasn't until I came to this work that I started to understand what unity and partnership really were, and that I had to also honor individuality at the same time. And this is something else I'd like to ask on behalf of my friends. How do we hold both truths? How have you understood how to truly bring full individuality and full unity into love, especially as a person who's been married for 44 years?
Yes, 44th anniversary right now. We've known each other for a little over 45 years. Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations on asking that question. Even to be aware of that kind of question means that you've done a lot of work on yourself and in your relationships. So good on you there.
Happily married. We did it.
Wonderful. I made that discovery. I didn't really made that discovery until I was in my early 30s. And I realized, oh, I haven't ever had a really close relationship by my standards. And why is that? And I'd always put the blame out there that I just never met the right person. And then I realized one day, oh, it's an inside job.
Mm.
My job is to figure out who I am and what I want in a close relationship. And then the universe's job is to send it to me.
Yeah.
The universe is great at manifestation. I mean, I've got these magical I've got 300-year-old oak trees on my property. In other words, they were here before the United States was here, and they're still doing their thing. Every year they produce their acorns, and they keep doing that year after year. And I never go out there by my oak trees and hear them saying something, oh, God dang it, I got to do acorns another year this year, but if you're in the natural flow of things, then life aligns itself much better for you. And once you know what you're doing here, I figured out my life purpose is to expand in love, creativity, and abundance every day as I inspire other people to do the same. And so I figured out my life purpose there in my early 30s. And so then I said, okay, what kind of relationship do I want? And so I came up with these 3 big fundamentals. I said, okay, I want a relationship that's absolutely honest, where everybody listens and nobody has to hide anything. And we just listen to each other, and it's no big deal. Because I'd grown up in a family where secrets were everywhere. Don't tell Aunt Delia about Uncle Bob, or all these kind of things that were supposed to not be said. So I wanted a no secrets relationship, complete honesty. Number 2, I wanted a relationship which didn't have blame in it. I had gotten really tired of being in relationships where we blamed each other all the time. And I realized, oh, there's only one way out of that problem. And that's if both people just take responsibility instead of blaming. Say, why am I creating this? And the other person said, why am I creating this?
Yeah.
And then you work it out through being responsible, because nobody ever blamed their way to happiness, guarantee you. And we've worked with 20,000 people now, and nobody ever blames their way to happiness or enlightenment. So I wanted a relationship where everybody just took responsibility, both of us. And I wanted a relationship too where we were both on the same creative path. I mean, she didn't have to be a writer, but she had to be something that appreciated my going in a room for 2 or 3 hours a day and working on my books.
Yeah.
But if that's not okay with a person, it's a problem, and I manifested relationships over and over again where it wasn't okay with the person. They'd give me grief about disappearing for 2 or 3 hours a day.
And now you found a creative partner who literally works with you and with whom you came to the work Conscious Loving and to this success.
Yeah, that was the great thing that happened when I was 34 is I met Katie, and it was literally a month after I set those intentions I was just telling you about. So it doesn't have to take a lot of time, folks.
Yeah.
And so I met the love of my life within a month of kind of figuring out what I wanted. And anyway, so we got together and we started working with people using those basic ideas that I mentioned, the honesty, the responsibility, the creative aspect of it. And people started coming to us for counseling and seminars and things like that. And we spent most of the 1980s doing, small seminars in our living room with 12 couples. And one night, we were sitting in front of the fireplace after one of these little groups of 12 couples in our living room, which was about what our living room could hold. And I remember we said, we've got to take these ideas out to the people. People need these ideas, because we were seeing such miracles happen in the lives of these people we were working with. So I sat down that weekend and I wrote the proposal for our book, Conscious Loving. And Here's another case of great timing. A friend of mine recommended an agent named Sandy Dykstra in
Mm.
San Diego. And I didn't know anything about her. It turned out she was a very famous agent who had just had a big bestseller with Amy Tan's book, The Joy Luck Club.
Mm-hmm.
And I called her because a friend of mine had recommended her and she had done my friend's book. And her secretary was out. I called her at lunchtime and she was there munching lunch when the phone rang and she picked it up herself. And how good a timing is that? Because
Unbelievable.
unbelievable. And so I made my little pitch and she agreed to look at the proposal, which she did, and tore the heck out of it, just slaughtered it, and made me go back. And instead of the 18-page thing I had done, I ended up with a 50-page thing. And she tore that apart. And I ended up, with something that she could then take to New York. And the beautiful thing was she ended up selling it for 10 times more than any book I'd ever written before. So it made a huge impact. And then the magic continued because the publicist at the publisher, who's a woman named Leslie Rossman, God bless her, don't know where she is today, but I bet she's doing great, booked Oprah for us with the first phone call.
First phone call.
Yeah. And I mean, how's that? How many times is that going to happen? So that's why I think that get in touch with your life purpose, get clear about that, and then get relationships that harmonize with that, and get busy on your genius, because like those birds that find their invisible way across the sky, that's what's pulling us, is that tug of our genius is pulling us toward that. That's pulling our evolution toward that. And what we have to do is just say yes to it and make a commitment to it.
I couldn't agree more. And I especially love that you demonstrate this point again and again, also in your entrepreneurial endeavors that seemed random, but all you did was say yes to a good idea, show up, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, listen, you have a book called Conscious Luck. I really liked it, by the way. But you also talk about nothing being a coincidence. In other words, if you are still obese, then it's not, you didn't set any intention other than to still stay here. If you are not happily married, you didn't set an intention other than to get here. So since you've enjoyed such remarkable success, and I believe it's a reflection of the intentions that you stated here, that you set, is it luck or is it our commitment and intention?
Well, maybe there are some people that are just born lucky. I don't know. But I remember deciding to get lucky. When I was in the ninth grade, there was this other kid that kind of gave me the secret. He said that he was lucky and he always won lotteries and things. And I saw it one day with my own two eyes. He won a wristwatch at a movie theater that probably had 250 people in it. And before the drawing, he even told me, I'm going to win one of the prizes. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, I always do. And what he had done, he said he made up his mind to be one of the lucky ones. Oh, it's that easy, huh? Well, try it out. Go ahead, set an intention just to be one of the lucky ones. Change your mind if you haven't been lucky. There's plenty of luck to go around. I didn't have any before I decided to be lucky.
Yeah.
And then, man, I got rewarded even when I was a kid. Oh, gosh, like right after that, I found a satchel on the pavement that had a $5,000 or so coin collection in it. And I took it into this store that I used to hang out in, this comic book store, and magazine shop, and said, hey, I just found this out in front of the shop. And the owner said, oh my God, that's a famous coin collector. He was just here. And because it was a coin collector shop too. And so later on, I got a big reward. He sent me a collection of Jefferson nickels and, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I know I was an ninth grader or whatever I was. And but anyway, I'm a big advocate for instead of going around believing that luck doesn't exist, go ahead and try it out. Say, I'm going to be lucky.
Yeah.
I'm okay with being lucky.
Let's
There's no
combine
effort to,
intention with luck. Exactly. Let's intend to win. And your secret mission has always been, according to this book, to have eternal happiness for everyone and for myself. Do you
that
still
was my
believe?
original birthday wish when I was a kid. Before I would blow out the candles, I
Is
would
it
think
still
in my
your
mind,
wish?
eternal happiness for everybody, including
Yeah.
me.
Is it still your wish?
Absolutely. And looks good, huh?
It sure does. What's next for y'all?
Well, we've been, I was just in a big meeting yesterday. We hired a really smart MIT person to build our AI coaches portal.
Wow.
And so we've put a lot of money into that over the past 6 months into building this beautiful coaches portal that you can find now on our website, but we're just about to launch the next evolution of it, which is the voice part of it. And in other words, so you could be walking along your favorite trail and say, hey, Gay, or hey, Katie, I've got a problem right now with my partner who's ... Or I've got a client I'm about to see who's depressed. Do you have any insights for me? And then you can talk to us about that.
That's
And
tremendous.
so it's already working, but it's going to be working even better in the next week or two when we announce the voice portal.
You're amazing. You're always on the cutting edge. I want to thank you so much for sharing that. I wish you, I would wish you success, but I already know it's going to work out for you.
Well, thank you. Yes, I've had a succession of lucky days here, thousands of them.
You sure have. And you know what? You made this my lucky day. I want all the listeners to know that this man is tremendously generous. I know how generous you are because a year ago, you had no idea who I was, but there was this nice lady who asked you to please blurb my book, Gilded, and you did me an enormous favor and a tremendous boon and honor by doing just that. I believe that that's been a huge part of why it's been successful, and I'll never forget that.
Oh, well, thank you. I had completely forgotten about that, but thanks for the gentle reminder, and many blessings to you on the continued success.
Thank you. I want to thank you so much for spending this time here with me. I know that this conversation will stay with me for a very long time, and I bet that this conversation will stay with you, listener, for a very long time, because there's nothing quite like getting to talk to your heroes. Whether you're ready to take your own big leap or deepen your relationship or simply love life more from wherever you are, I really hope this conversation has been a beacon for you as it has for me. You can find Loving Life, The Big Leap, Conscious Loving, The Big Leap podcast, anywhere else that we can think of to link for finding and connecting with Gay Hendricks below. And as he says, I want you to leave here loving as much as you can from wherever you find yourself. Gay, thank you again so much for being here. It's been a real honor.
Thank you, Keren. Thank you for inviting me.
My beyond pleasure.